Today, we are here to have an exclusive interview with the Rent Control Department of the Western Housing Ministry. To help us digest the issues in relation to rent, Mr. Emmanuel Hovey Kporsu. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
Right. We want to know, does the Rent Control Department really exist?
Okay, so rent control really exists. If you look at the Rent Control Law, that is 1986, and the Rent Act 1963, these two laws or these two legislations are each legislation that has mandated the department to act as mediators between landlords and tenants. So these two laws forms or create the Rent Control Department. So we exist through this law. Though since 1942, there has been a lot of legislations which the Rent Control Department has passed through. But currently, we are using these two laws. That's the Rent Control Law 1986 and the Rent Act 1963 as our mandate to act between landlords and tenants. We serve landlords, tenants, and anybody who's interested in any rented apartment. I'm saying rental apartment. There are two categories. Any government property is not within our domain, like bungalows, the AMA market, the Metropolitan and District Assembly markets, and bungalows are not within our domain. But private dwelling rented houses falls under our domain, falls under our jurisdiction, of which if any grievance come under this, the person or the group or the parties has to come to rent control for adjudication.
Okay. When it comes to rent, day in, day out, we hear a lot of issues between landlords and tenants. We want you to educate the public. What are the functions or the roles of landlords and tenants when it comes to tenancy agreements?
Okay. So just as you mentioned, before you rent your place out, as a property owner, you can build a property and dwell in or give it to your family members or your wife's children and co. If you've not rented it out, then no law is infringed on you in a nutshell. But when it comes to mind that I want to rent these premises out, there are rules and regulations that might guide you as a landlord. Of course, if you've not given your premises out to collect money from somebody, you can't call yourself a landlord. And if you've not paid money to somebody that I want to dwell in your premises for this period of time, you can't call yourself a tenant. Because my father can build a house, give it to me. I can't call myself a tenant. My father cannot call himself a landlord. But when you want to rent it out, just as I said, there are rules and regulations. The first thing you have to do is to come for what we call an assessment, because that assessment to determine how much you have to charge your premises. Of course, without knowing the rent, the recoverable rent, which is the rent that you have to charge, you cannot draft a tenancy agreement. Without a tenancy agreement, you cannot rent your premises out. So the first and the foremost function or duty of a landlord is to ask for an assessment. After the assessment is done, the Rent Control Department gives out what we call an assessment certificate. That assessment certificate will give you that authority to advertise your premises. You can use what we call the agents, or you can still use the Rent Control Department, where we have two vacant, we have two registers. The first register is what we call the vacant premise register. The second register is the prospective tenant register. So your vacant premise will be entered into our database, so that those roaming looking for apartment, which we call the prospective tenant, when they come to our domain or our offices, we can show them the available premises we have. So when you get somebody, the first thing after getting the person is the tenancy agreement that you mentioned. And there are ingredients that you have to attach or that has to be in the tenancy agreement. The first item is the recoverable rent, which we mentioned. So after the assessment, you get the recoverable rent. That recoverable rent has to be stated in the tenancy agreement. The frequency of payment, if the person will be allowed to pay monthly or a maximum of 6 months, has to be stated in there. You have to get witnesses to attest to the agreement you are signing, because it's a mutual agreement. It's not an imposition you are going to impose on somebody. After getting all those things in the tenancy agreement, you need to state your right and responsibility as a landlord, because you have responsibility in the house. The tenant who is coming to occupy the premises also has rights and responsibilities. So all these things might be factored into the tenancy agreement. When you give the tenancy agreement to the person, the person signs, the law and the rent control law, section 4, demands that you, the landlord, has to register this tenancy agreement with the rent control department, where we will go through and make sure that you are not infringing on somebody's human right. The frequency of payment is not going contrary to the rent control law or the Rent Act. So we check all this and then we will approve it. So it's after the approval that you have the right to go and collect money from the prospective tenant. When the person gives you the money, you are supposed to instantly give the person a receipt. You are supposed to go to Ghana Revenue Authority to pay what we call the rent tax, which is 8% if it's domestic, and then 15% which is what is called commercial. So these are basic responsibilities. When we come to the tenant, after you've occupied somebody's premises, you make sure that you don't deteriorate the person's premises. You make sure that you don't cause nuisance and annoyance. You make sure that you don't use the person's premises for immoral and illegal purposes. You make sure that you pay your rent frequently, because the law demands under section 17 that you don't have the right to owe any landlord a month's rent. So if you owe more than a month's rent, the landlord can stand on it, come to the rent control department, go to the law court before the magistrate, and ask for order of eviction. So these are basic rights and responsibilities that both landlords and tenants need to have in their pockets.
All right. Thank you so much.